Squeak. So hello and welcome to the Eldritch Lorecast. This week we talk about Total Party Kill!
This week on the Eldritch Lorecast we're talking TPKs, Total Party Kills, and the Rings of Power. But not those Rings of Power. All that and more right now. What do I do? How do I do this? That's right, I remember now. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Much like the board game Wingspan, it is the most pleasant Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing game podcast. Oh, I'm a little bit rusty. My name is Ben Byrne, and I am back this week as ever with James Hake, Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, and Dael, I have to ask, have you ever, as a GM, TPK'd your party or been part of a TPK?
Total Party Kill. We should probably say what TPK stands for.
Yeah, that's
Total
true.
Party Kill.
Really good point.
Means.
Let's see. Let me think back. I've never TPK'd a party. I think I've been in one TPK. It's a very foggy memory. I don't even remember what the system was, but it was sort of not exactly a one-shot. It was a one-shot to see whether we wanted to play a broader campaign, and it ended very badly for us. Everybody was dead. Everybody's dead, Dave. And I don't think we did end up playing a campaign. Really it was like, you know what? Nah, this is a sign. Yeah.
Shawn Merwin, I have to imagine you've TPK'd at least one group of players, if not been part of one as a player.
Oh, yes, all of the above. I was in an 8-player in an AD&D campaign. We were 4th level, I still remember, and we were investigating a haunted house, and we got TPK'd, and it was early in the evening. So the DM said, "Well, let's roll up for new 1st level characters, and we'll pick up a different storyline." So we rolled up 1st level characters. We went back to the haunted house, and those characters also got TPK'd in the same evening. And that was the end of that campaign. And in 5th edition, for the finale of Tomb of Annihilation, I could have TPK'd the party. I ended up having a Sararak let one character live to do the walk of shame as he left the tomb carrying all of the ashes of his comrades.
Leave one alive to tell the tale.
Exactly. But that was a clear. I was giving clues for the characters of what they needed to do to not get TPK'd, but they continued to fight a Sararak, so they sort of had it coming.
That is, I never got to the end of Tomb of Annihilation. I ran it 3 times almost. The 3rd time we only did sort of the start of it. But I've referred to Omu as the place campaigns go to die, because basically the party spend a year getting to Omu and then the campaign stops. So I've never gotten to the end, but it is spoilers for Tomb of Annihilation. If anybody's playing it, hopefully your GM will maybe throw their own flavor in there.
Block your little ears.
The end of that campaign is almost they get TPK'd, like the party defeat the big bad, and then pop, here comes the bigger bad to mess them up. And I have to admit, I was kind of looking forward to that, but it's because I like brutal dark fantasy. James Hake, are you a TPKer or are you TPK'd?
Basically, all of my TPK experiences have come in Betrayal at House on the Hill or its D&D.
Woo! Sorry. I got excited. Go ahead. Speaking of haunted houses.
Betrayal at Baldur's Gate often ends for me in my side of the board. I'm very rarely the betrayer in that game. My side of the board, it's comeuppance for being DM all the time. I finally get to suffer. Just getting absolutely blisteringly wiped out by some sort of, servant of Ol Hydra or some nonsense like that. And that's a very fun game to get TPK'd in, I think. It's very fun to, you've sat down for an hour and you've created a little story with your characters and role-played through. We all play Betrayal, role-playing our characters.
We all have voices that we do for our characters. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shout out to Brandon, the most annoying voice that one of my friends does while playing Betrayal at House on the Hill.
No, I think it's especially fun to roleplay that half-orc cleric that is there in the Betrayal at Baldur's Gate box. I have a lot of fun with him. But anyway, no, in D&D, I can't say I am on the receiving or giving end of a TPK very often.
Sure. I suppose they shouldn't come around very often, which we'll dive into in a second, because speaking of TPKs, I didn't want to get too deep into the specifics for people that are watching Critical Role. So if you're watching the current season, the lightest just little touch of spoilers, you've probably heard about this in the kind of discourse on social media, but the term TPK has come up surrounding Critical Role as of episode 33 of Campaign 3. The fallout of that has now been revealed in episode 34. But again, without giving too much away about the show itself, I just wanted to open the door because I don't think we've talked about TPKs, how to handle them. Are they something the GM maybe not should aim for, but are they something the GM should actively try to avoid? What are our experiences and advice around the infamous, if you will, TPK? Because my one experience doing it was the climax of the campaign, much like Shawn at the end of Tomb of Annihilation. This wasn't my plan to TPK the party whatsoever. It was they would defeat the big bad in this climactic battle, and then the day would be won, and they would all get out of there bloody and muddy and dirty and go out and face the news reporters and be like, it was a hard battle, but we came through it at the end. And just the way the math kind of delicately tipped away from their favor, and they all died. And it created this incredibly, almost like a Greek tragedy, like it was inevitable that they were going to TPK at the end, which it wasn't. I reviewed the footage in my mind, so to speak, and I was like, oh, did I push it too hard? Was the encounter too difficult? No, they sort of made these poor decisions here and here that I think probably would have changed the outcome if they weren't so focused on X, Y, Z reason. It was a Rakshasa they were fighting, and one of them kept casting spells against it, kind of knowing that wouldn't work. But they were sort of as a party in a barbarian rage. But anyway, there's a lot of mixed feelings with TPKs. It's like, did I as the GM do the right thing? Is this the best outcome for the table? Has this told the best story for us all together? And if TPKs are something you should avoid, as a question more than a statement, what is the use of having the threat of a TPK over the party as a storytelling device and a gameplay device? Sorry, Dael, go ahead.
I was just going to say Matt Colville's in chat saying that he's been TPK'd at least once per edition. So, there are different experiences. But no, I feel like, for start, again, without actual spoilers, I think that episode 33 and sort of 34 of Critical Role are a great example of actually how a TPK, because it wasn't one, should work within the heart of a campaign, right? Ideally, okay? So Ben's just talked about campaign ending TPKs, which have their own kind of poignance to them, right? So the danger with a TPK, in my mind, is that it flies in the face of generic conventions, right? So the genre of fantasy includes such things as what's it called? The eucatastrophe, which is a moment where everything seems hopeless, but there's a sort of swoop upwards into hopefulness and something happens. It's Aragorn leaping off the ships. They see the ships with the enemy flags and they think, oh no, we've lost the Battle of Pelennor Fields, but then Aragorn leaps off with an army of ghosts and you're like, oh, actually everything's going to be okay, right? That is a staple of fantasy that makes fantasy. And once you have all of your heroes die terribly, that sort of clashes with the idea of what a fantasy is. But there is something salvageable in that if it happens to be the finale of your campaign, because it can turn it into tragedy. And a Greek tragedy has exactly the opposite. It has to show the downfall of the hero, ideally through not hubristic, because hubris is a different thing, but I'll give you a new word, hamartia, the fatal flaw. Hubris is specifically pride. Just a fun fact for you. So there is something salvageable there. Whereas if you look at something like what happened in Critical Role now, this is in the middle of the story. If everyone had died then, it would have felt bad. But what happened, you watch the game of chance move against them. They roll badly on initiative. It all kind of, all the little mechanical, mathematical aspects of D&D fell into place against them. The dominoes fell and it was bad. But spoilers, I hope all the Critical Role people have already skipped ahead. Skip ahead. This is okay.
If you're watching it live, I'm sorry. Come back in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I won't even be that long. It's fine. You can, again, block your little ears. But you have 7, I think, different times that a character went down unconscious, but 3 characters died out of a total of, 7? 6 or 7, and only one of them actually stayed dead, right? So we're talking about D&D. They were given the resources necessary to handle that kind of a situation, but to still make it tense. And I think walking out of those 2 episodes, ultimately with one actually dead character, and we'll see where we go from here, is an incredible feat of DMing. I think that it is an incredible balancing act to have the risks be so dire and to still come away with it feeling like it can be good, that we have somewhere to go from here, that it is still fantasy, that there is still story.
Yeah, given the fact that it's a dice game, when you're trying to thread that bridge, so to speak, the math can very easily, I've gotten close into TPK situations in normal, just run-of-the-mill fighting an ogre encounters because the party kind of steamrolled their way in, didn't really prepare enough, and now they're just rolling low, which meant, they could win the encounter, but now they're rolling terribly. I'm curious, Shawn, your attitude with Tomb of Annihilation, which I ran like Tomb of Vietnam. As soon as they hit the beaches of Cholt, it was just, chaos and death. And it was very, not dissimilar to what Matt is saying in the chat, the Rogue One model of, if we do this, we stop them, but we don't get out alive. I was trying the entire campaign to very heavily flag that and say, you are going to your deaths, but you will do a great thing if you choose to partake in this, which narratively is a difficult needle to thread with role-playing gamers, because you don't want to give them no hope, because then they start to feel like, what was the point in engaging with the game? So I'm kind of curious, Shawn, your take on Tomb of Annihilation, then TPKs kind of more broadly.
Right. As we've been saying, this was we knew this was the last session of the campaign. So there wasn't a story to go on beyond it. It was just, can you save the world? And that's separate from defeating the bad guy at the spoilers for Tomb of Annihilation. That's separate. You can save the world, but then lose to the bad guy, which is what happened. So, they did that. They saved the world. They did their heroic thing. They could have escaped, but they chose to stay and fight, whether on purpose or not realizing they could escape, but they did that. It's completely different, as we're saying, when it happens in the middle of the story. And really what you should be doing if you're running a long campaign is during that session 0, sit down and say, if there is a TPK, if there is a character death, this is how I would like to handle it as the game master. Is that okay with you as the players? Or you players, what do you feel like character death or a total party kill? We should probably say what TPK stands for.
Yeah, that's
total
true.
Party kill.
Really good point.
Means. And so when you do that, if and when it happens, there isn't this outrage, there's not this shock. You have the roadmap for how to handle it. And that will take away some of the sting. If you have a very competitive gamer at the table who takes it personally that all the characters are dead and is looking, maybe is angry about it and is looking to argue or have, that you can have that roadmap in place, which I think is, very valuable when you're setting up what your campaign is going to be. Is it going to be a competitive, I'm going to see if I can defeat you characters, or is it going to be we're telling a story together?
James, what about you? What's your experience? What's your thoughts on the total party kill?
I think that a lot of it has been said already. The TPKs got potential for a big narrative beat wherever it shows up. Yes, it has potential for a huge sort of Rogue One-ish ending. I'm really interested in the difference between what Matt was talking about above with the can you scroll up and show me that comment one more time?
Was it this one?
No, the one before it, the very first one. Oh yeah. Usually when the edition came out, Matt Koval said he suffered a TPK usually about once per edition because the DM wasn't really aware of how strong the monsters were, probably. It was kind of their trial by fire in realizing, oh, this is how this edition works. And I think that's pretty indicative of the way that most TPKs end up happening. Not necessarily, we didn't know how strong the monsters were, but because, yeah, the tapioca pizza comment. But because of inexperience with the system, either on the part of the players or the game master. And that sort of TPK is pretty significantly at odds with the other sort of narratively dramatic and narratively relevant TPKs that we've been talking about. D&D and similar role-playing games always have to walk this tightrope of game and storytelling medium. And sometimes, in order to lean in one direction, you need to sacrifice bits and pieces of the other to make that happen. And I think the general consensus, certainly my opinion, and I'll bet if I asked you, you'd agree, is that TPKs that happen due to mechanical inexperience or bad luck, the dice like we were talking about earlier, are generally pretty unsatisfying events, unless you're playing in the kind of game where there isn't much of a story anyway. The story is more of a chronicle of the events that occurred rather than a plot that the characters or the GM are actively negotiating during play. If you're talking about a classic D&D adventure, Caves of Chaos, that sort of thing, where you get to the end, you get back to the keep on the Borderlands, and you're like, wow, what a story we told there. We'll tell stories of when we nearly died in that goblin cave forever. That's the sort of story in which a TPK makes for great stuff. But if you're talking about, a Greek tragedy and Oedipus randomly gets ganked by bandits on the road and that's where it ends, I mean, that's not really...
Oracle was wrong.
Oops, got that one wrong.
Would have been a happier ending.
Yeah, you know what? You're not wrong.
Yeah, truly.
Then what are our thoughts then on, that moment where you can see the writing on the wall as the GM a little bit? You're like, their rolls are going really badly. This monster has 2 dice for its damage and they're still only like level 4 or something like that. This would be a really unsatisfying end to a campaign if it ended, or at least this branch of the campaign if it ended right here. How heavy do you as a GM feel your hand should fall upon the scales to tilt them back into the party's favor if it's feeling like it's going to be an unsatisfying moment, whether this is through slashing the monster's HP, the controversial, ever-dreaded dice fudging, or whatever other tool kind of is within your GM toolkit to help the party feel like they succeeded?
I think I am about to advocate for something that could get me in trouble with the internet. I do think that secrecy is a powerful DM tool, right? Like being able to swap from rolling, 2d10s for damage behind the screen and 2d8s. That's great, that is I think, useful thing to have. I think it is useful to be able to, someone says, they try something different for one turn, fire damage or something, and you look stricken down at your notes that say nothing, and you go, you know what? This changes the battle. Like suddenly this beast has a vulnerability. You unlocked the next phase. Oh, it's more hurt than you thought. I think that is a handy thing, which is bad of me, because in an ideal world, the emergent storytelling of the dice falling where they may, that's wonderful. And I think that you can do that for big fights, for big moments. I think that is great. That is really cool. That is powerful and evocative. But if you've accidentally swarmed your players with one too many were-rats on the path to the dungeon, maybe you should be doing stuff behind the DM screen. Maybe that's good. It is tricky though, because it's like a lot of it comes down to prep. I'm a big believer in you can make the stakes feel higher than the stakes actually are. Like, there are tools for that. Minion rules that you can use. You can have wave combat so that they're fighting a lot of things, but only ever 4 or 5 at a time. Just tweak it a little bit in your favor behind the scenes. Secrecy is good. Lie to your players. Emotional manipulation.
It's totally okay to lie unless you are dealing with players who A, know you're lying, and B, get angry if you are caught lying.
Yeah, don't lie if you're a bad liar.
Right. But it's all about what the players want. It's all about what's best for the game. And right, if I'm running an Adventurers League campaign or adventure in this organized play world, and the players at the table have told me, don't pull any punches, we want to see how we do against this adventure, then I'm rolling the dice in front of them, and I am not pulling any punches. And if a TPK is the result, then great, that's the result. If it's a table of kids at a game store for a special game day, I'm rolling behind my screen or behind my hand because I'm too short to use a screen. Everything is happening. It looks dire. It looks dire right up until the end, and then something happens. One player hits it just the right time, and everybody cheers, and that's what you want in that sort of game. So, right, know your players, know the game that you're playing, the type of game that you're looking to get out of it, and the answer should be pretty clear. If you can answer those questions for yourself.
We did a video on dice fudging earlier in the year. Dice fudging specifically as one tool among many. And it kind of, as I was considering both sides of this argument in terms of whether you should fudge your dice and whether you shouldn't, and ultimately kind of coming down to, I do, but I tell my players at the start of a campaign, like in a session 0, I will never tell you when or where it's coming, or when or where it's happened, so to speak, more so. I'm not planning to do it per se. But know that it is something that I may use sparingly, if it feels more narratively satisfying to do so. The argument against dice fudging that I get behind, though, is the sense that if players are defeated, they feel cheated. And if players succeed or they snatch victory back from the jaws of defeat, but know that it came as a result of a dice fudge or the DM's hand on the scales, they feel like they didn't earn the victory. It feels hollow. It doesn't feel like an organic part of the story. It doesn't feel like part of the game. Apart from the advice, be a good liar, do any of you have any advice around, being able to, I always get this word wrong, obfuscate?
Obfuscate.
You Thank you, obfuscate. Got it right the second time. When you are using DM fiat to ensure that the players still feel like their ideas, creativity, dice rolls are what is seizing victory.
I'll down a couple people. It's if I sense that there's enough people going down that the action economy is going to start to play a major role, that's when I'll probably start lying. Or I'm just going to call it lying now. It's not, I'm not sugarcoating it anymore. Or the alternative, actually, if I feel like a combat is dragging on way too long and my players are getting super bored.
I think my most...
Tactics. Go ahead, James.
No, Shawn, talk about tactics. I'm much more interested in hearing you talk about tactics.
Well, tactics are a way that you can use imperfect tactics while still making it look like you're using good tactics. So, the monsters are just smashing the players. Well, 2 of the monsters are going to run to the entrances that lead into the room to block them so no one can escape. Seems like a good tactic that the monsters would use. but really all they're doing is giving the characters two monster attacks off while they do this thing. So just little things like that make sense in the story. So the players, even if they're tactically sound, might say, "Oh yeah, that would make sense. That he's trying to keep us from escaping." When really you're just letting them rest for.
Because we knew they were never going to run in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Man, I admire DMs who can do that on the fly so much, because I'm like charismatic enough to lie, but I am not smart enough to do tactics or bad tactics. I don't know the difference.
Do like role play the monsters in combat rather than playing them strategically like it's a war game. I first time, speaking of what Matt said before in terms of like using a monster for the first time, I dropped a Mind Flayer on my party and they were all perfectly lined up because they were in a tunnel, and I used Mind Blast. No one had intelligence as a saving throw. There was no wizards in the party or anything. It just paralyzed the whole party. And I was like, oh, this guy's about to have a feast if he wanted to. And I just like changed my mind on the fly. And it worked to make the Mind Flayer seem just weird instead. It was like, he is studying you. He wants to see how you react to getting mind blasted. So he just like watches you as you're paralyzed in that state and then walks away, or teleports out of there or whatever happened. So it sort of narratively worked really well in that moment, that little bit of improvisation.
Oh, I remembered what I was going to say, and it's about fudging. It's times that I fudged really strongly in my own favor because the boss fight was going sort of the opposite of a TPK. the total party steamroll all my plans. And it was in Princes of the Apocalypse. It's one of the showdowns with the elemental prophets, with Erisi, the air prophet, this winged elf with a legendary weapon, a spear in her hands. And there's a great illustration of how this fight is supposed to go in the book, where she's kind of lounging upon her throne while her invisible stalker uppercuts a player character in front of her for her own amusement. The fight did not go that way. The fight kind of went as any 5 party members versus, one boss monster goes, where turn 1 is done and she has about 10 hit points left. And yeah, that, just like you were saying, Dael,
110 hit points.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think I literally added triple-digit number extra hit points onto her, because otherwise the fight would have been over in a heartbeat. Because that's the kind of fight that I and my players wanted. They wanted an exhilarating sort of solo monster boss fight. And like I played up the narrative of it too. It was like, one of the things I did in that Princes of the Apocalypse campaign is I played up the sort of eldritch horror aspect of Tharizdun being the sort of commander of the Princes of Elemental Evil. Because he is in that adventure, but not very effectively. It's kind of hinted at. Anyway, and I was like, she sort of starts glowing with purple light, and these unholy mutations start bursting out of her skin, and there's a 200 extra hit points. One extra action every turn. And, you can lie to your players in a way that favors you if it makes the fight more fun. It's always possible.
Yeah.
And phase 2s of boss fights are really great for that. Just like you were saying, Dael, kind of in the opposite direction, showing a phase in which like you crack the boss's armor and suddenly, its AC is 5 points lower, is a great way of doing it too.
Look, that is just science. That's how it works. It's
Yeah, that's science. That's how it works. Is both a DM's tool and a DM's bane when the players are like, no, but you see, the peasant rail gun would absolutely work because physics say that when a spear reaches velocity within 6 seconds. Anyway. Speaking of science, science is used for many things, including the creation of ring lights and wedding rings and other types of rings as well.
I read the run sheet and I had no idea where that was going.
I felt like I had to come back with a bit of a vengeance.
It's good. It's good.
Shawn Merwin, would you say that you are currently in the market? That's the word I'm looking for. Would you say you're in the market for some hot new bling?
No. Although, if you are a person that likes jewelry, I hear that there is something very exciting, nay, even magical, coming to a GameStop near you.
I
love Shawn just cutting short this segment where you go around to each person and ask them if they wear rings, and we all say no.
Yeah, just...
Do you eat breakfast? No.
No.
Do you wear ties? No.
Does anybody... I mean, I wasn't a ring person beforehand. Are you a ring wearer, James?
Man, not really. I've always kind of wanted to get into jewelry, though. If I were to find a ring that would break my no ring streak.
Okay. Well, do you like magic?
Of course I do, Ben.
Well, have I got the magic piece of jewelry or several of for you? Because GameStop in the US are selling a set of, how many? Is it six? 6 replica rings made of metal, the most high quality, probably tin around, because it's only $40 US. So the low price of what that's like $5 a ring,
Wow.
$50 a ring, something like that. You can get the Ring of Spell Turning, which is a little mirror on a ring. You need to, I don't know, do your hair. You just like look at that Ring of Spell Turning. It's great for turning spells and adjusting your look for the
Turning
day.
your own charm person back on you.
Yeah, great, perfect.
Looks great, man.
Or Dael, for the times when your fireplace gets a bit unruly, you might like a Ring of Fire Resistance.
It's amazing that you picked that one. It's the only one of these that I like.
It is actually genuinely a nice ring, you know.
It's quite pretty.
It is quite pretty. I almost like the telekinesis one as well, with the hands holding the gem, but it's a little bit over the top. The gem's a bit too big.
Those are hands. I didn't see that those were hands. I see it now. I understand. We should be putting a link of this in chat.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of the Ring of Spell storing that is sort of a scroll that curls around 2 fingers. I think that when I first saw that illustration,
I think that would suit
DMG,
you.
Yeah. When I first saw that illustration in the DMG when 5th edition came out, I was like, that's a kick-ass ring. I would wear that ring. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. The X-ray vision ring, maybe not so much. That's just an eyeball. Although, actually, I was at the Queen Victoria Market the other day, which is a market in the centre of Melbourne, and there was somebody just selling like a little bowl filled with eyeball rings. So I don't know, maybe that one's not as special or as unique as one might think.
Yeah, this is not a sponsored segment. This is culture, D&D.
If it was a sponsored segment, we'd be doing a very bad job. I don't wear rings, and I think that only one of them is pretty. Thank you to our sponsor.
The interesting one, I think, is the Ring of 3 Wishes, because because the Ring of Telekinesis has the hands, the Ring of Fire Resistance has the fire-looking pattern on it. The Ring of 3 Wishes, you could not guess what that ring was for by looking at it. It just kind of looks like a bit of a disc with some gems in it. Have I sold anybody on these rings?
I think I need to clarify, maybe we didn't make this clear enough, is that these rings, they're designed after the ring illustrations that are in the Dungeon Master.
They are.
These are official D&D magic items that have been, that you could hand to your players for props if you wanted to, if they got that ring in game.
That is true. Yes, we should. Now we're doing a good
They're thinking like a DM.
I was going to say I would, if I bought these, I would read the fine print to make sure, one, you didn't have to cast Identify to make sure if you need to attune to them to get them to work, and you have to know that one of these is really cursed.
Yeah. Dangerous thing.
Yeah, in my experience, getting that many magic items all at once is kind of a trap. I wouldn't trust any DM who just gave me that box.
Yep. I feel like an idea for the products person, the packaging person next time, because in the box you can see they got the name of the ring printed underneath where it's slotted into the box. Instead, they should have a little envelope, and the envelope says Identify on it, and they open that, and that has all the names of the rings.
That'd be cute.
Very cute.
Well, I'm sorry if I've sold anybody on these, because unfortunately you can't buy them anymore. They're sold out.
Oh, no. I'm still trying to figure out what kind of metal they're made of. Don't people have metal allergies? I think they should probably list that.
That was one of the questions, actually, was will this turn your finger blue? Because that tends to happen with cheap metal.
I mentioned curse. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, he's right.
It's the wild magic surge that turns you blue, except just a little part of your finger.
Physical props, something that you folks have used a lot in your D&D games, particularly with magic items. Have you done the spell, the healing potion with the little D4s in the jar?
I've used physical pieces of paper, weathered and torn and hand calligraphed a number of times, because people love that stuff. It's such an easy and inexpensive way to add some...
Fold them up, carry them around in my pocket so they look worn.
Hey, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I should remember that. Yeah. I haven't been able to do it for ages, though, because so much of my game has been online these past 2 years. There's two things I really miss. There's three things. There's four things. Actually, there's a lot of things I really miss now that I think about it. One of the many things that I miss.
Amongst those things.
And none of them are that.
Amongst our weaponry. That's one of the things I really miss about playing D&D in person is that sort of physical interaction, whether it's, being able to stalk around the table and go, and now he grabs you by the shoulder and here is the letter that you have pried from the dead man's grip, and you unfold it. And it's the treasure map. And that's just the sort of, immersion building, Disney ride, Pirates of the Caribbean sort of thing that makes D&D really special. IMO.
Yeah, I love making physical puzzles. I've ruined many a tea towel, a kitchen towel with coffee grain because I was staining the paper. But I enjoy doing.
You could just use paper towels for that.
You know what, Dael? Then
compostable,
wasteful. Yeah,
I don't think it is.
Is like, I've drawn a picture on one side of a piece of paper and written like a message on the other side, and then cut it all up so that the players have to puzzle together what the picture is before they're able to read the other side of the paper.
Oh, cool.
A really good version of that I saw online. I've wanted to do it for years, but I've never put in the effort or had the opportunity. Is somebody made like a stone slab. I feel like I saw this on Instagram or something. It's just like foam, but what they've done is they've carved into it a symbol. Could be a deity's symbol, could be the answer to a puzzle, could be whatever. But they carved into it this ancient-looking symbol and then broke it into pieces, stained it or painted it grey, made it look like stone, so that I assume the way that this was used was as the campaign progresses, the party find a piece of this ancient tablet of power as they adventure around, and eventually they get to slot the entire thing together, which seems really cool to me.
That does seem really cool. Also, it's giving me
a very sort of Legend of Zelda thing to do.
Yeah, that's
why you completed the dungeon and found a shard
it's giving
of the mirror.
Me nostalgic flashbacks to helping my brother make Warhammer terrain out of styrofoam.
Yeah,
that's exactly the sort of stuff.
One terrain piece to rule them all. Yeah.
Shawn, are you a fan of physical props, physical things like that?
You know what I'm going to say. No.
We did know you were going to say that.
No, it's great. It's great. And if you have a DM that does it and you enjoy it, it's wonderful. It's something I would have done 25 years ago, but time passes. One thing that I do, and the DMs that I play with do, is we do physical skill challenges. So rather than like having a skill
so for an
challenge where you
acrobatics
roll
check, you have to do a backflip.
Yeah.
you do something that relates to that. So we've done all sorts of things. Archery. We've done, stacking blocks. We've done, doing puzzles to represent what you're actually doing in the game. So it's not necessarily a prop, although the paper that you write on is. But we do, games like, I don't know if they have Can Jam over there. The game Can Jam.
No.
I don't know what this is.
I don't know the game Can Jam.
It must be a Western New York
East
thing.
Coast thing.
Think of a barrel and a frisbee, and there's a small. The barrel has no top, and then there's a small slot just large enough that a frisbee would fit in. And you have two of those, and you have two people that stand on each side, and you throw the frisbee. You're either trying to get it through the small slot in this barrel-like thing, or you're trying to get it in the top, and your partner who is next to the barrel you're throwing to can't grab it, but can alter the flight of the frisbee. And so, games like that, we will play to see how well we do.
I needed to know about this before my carnival-themed birthday. That would be great. And also, note to self, bring my bow next time I play with Shawn.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd hate to think what you do for Constitution saves, but
right.
Yeah,
yes, we have to hold our breath.
Drink the hot sauce
for 10 hours.
Yeah, or just like take a solid punch to the gut. Just see if you can. Nothing hard, just a good. To see if you can weather it.
There's 8 shots in this glass. Can you drink the potion?
That we do on a normal day, so that's fine.
Everyone just passes a Constitution check merely by being there and drinking.
Dante says TPK got REI and then fixes it to got real. I thought that was very funny, Dante, because in my neck of the woods, REI is a sports store that you go to to get camping gear and hiking gear and
where you could buy a Can Jam set too.
Yeah. TPK got REI is very funny, Dante. Well done. You meant to do that.
Closest I got was return on investment with an accent.
Can Jam sounds like to foosball what tennis is to ping pong to me. If you're trying to get like a disc to go in sideways into foosball's the disc on the table and you like knock it back and forth.
Foosball is soccer on a table and you spin the little
You're thinking of air hockey. Yeah.
So soccer is to foosball what Can Jam is to air hockey, which is tennis is to ping pong. Am I there?
I don't know, Shawn, is he?
You are somewhere, but I'm not sure where there is.
Well, speaking of being
Can Jam country now.
Speaking of being somewhere, what have we got on the time? This is going to dictate. We've got a little bit of time, so I'm going to dive into this question from Adrian. Adrian's question came in via email, podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. If you want to ask us a question, I always almost forget that bit. It is the email you should send it to, but the email is, what is your favorite part of the game to create and why? So speaking of creating things, do you love as a GM among the four of us creating the world history, the background and mythology of a game? Or do you enjoy creating the monsters and the stat blocks? Or do you enjoy creating like the dungeon, what the layout's going to be and what that's going to look like? Shawn, what's your favorite aspect of creation as a GM or as a game designer for that matter?
As a game designer, I've gone through all the stages and I've finally gotten to the point where my favorite thing to do is create encounters. Because encounters are where the players actually interact with all of those other things that you create. So you can do a good job creating a world, a mythology, gods, monsters, dungeons. But unless you can create encounters that highlight what those things do, then the players are never going to interact with them in a meaningful way that they can enjoy. So I'm to the point now where encounters, where the real nuts and bolts interaction with the players is happening, that's where I love to design.
Now for Ben, encounters to designing what resolution is to grief.
Oh,
Okay,
right.
you go through the stages and that's where you end up.
The bit where you don't care anymore. Gotcha. Funnily, you should say that, Dael, because I was going to ask Shawn to expand a little bit on what you mean by encounters, because, you're not, I assume, just talking about combat encounters. You might be talking about, any of the pillars mixed together or something else kind of entirely, but where the rubber sort of meets the road.
Yeah, absolutely. You are saying it. And you should be able to work in all of those things you're creating in any sort of encounter, whether it's combat encounters, role-playing, exploration, a mix, varying those types of encounters and bringing in those other elements of the world, of the mythology, of monster creation, of history. Always be looking to those larger things to funnel down into that encounter.
Dael, what about you? Our emailer posited that perhaps creating a world's mythology, or to borrow a phrase you've used before, a world's sperm, is perhaps your favorite part of...
it's an acronym. For the people listening who don't know, it's an acronym. It stands for social, political, economic, religious, and military.
Yeah, great. Yes, go.
I must have missed that episode. Surely I would have remembered that.
Do you not remember? Oh, wow.
I don't know whether we've talked about it on this podcast.
No, absolutely.
Surely we have. I mean, you and I definitely talked about it in a video we did for my channel.
For the record,
I've talked about it on my channel.
I want it known. I threw that out there as a joke under the assumption that most folk would know what I was talking about.
But here's what Ben didn't account for, is that the Eldritch Lorecast is gaining ever more listeners every week. So anyway, okay. People in chat recall the sperm acronym.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, I'm out of trouble. Continue.
Yeah, you're fine.
I do enjoy the explanation. Don't do
it, Dante. That stuff is fun to me. I like using that for city building, for faction building. I think it's really helpful. Just anytime I get stuck in coming up with stuff, I go, okay, but like, what's the military aspect? Sure. And use it as a great touchstone. But weirdly, I don't think the lore of a world is typically like my favorite thing. I think when it comes to game designing, I have a really comfortable niche in subclass design. I find that stuff fun. I find it interesting and engaging to try and come up with mechanics that fit a theme. Like, how do you take this idea of, like, I don't know, a ghost sorcerer? I was just reading the Grim Hollow book again, so that's on my head. How do you take the idea of a ghost sorcerer?
Dael. Good.
Yeah.
We here at Ghost Player Gaming approve of you reading the Grim Hollow campaign guide.
Thank you. How do you take the idea of ghost sorcerer and marry that with mechanics that like sell the concept, in play? I love doing that stuff when I'm designing. And when I'm doing a specific campaign or running a game, I think it's probably, I don't know, I like thinking of events and social tensions. That feels really specific, but it's like, I've been working on a setting that is, there's too much magic here. It's reached like toxic levels. There's so much pollution from this overuse of magic, and it's creating more sorcerers than the city can cope with. And the sorcerers aren't trained to use their magic, so that's dangerous. So people are scared of the I like doing those sort of join the dots, setting up those dominoes for events down the line. I think that's the part of campaign and adventure design that I find really fun and intriguing.
For me, I like coming up with villains. Villains are my starting point.
Nice.
My current campaign has a vampire artificer as the villain. And I've kind of been, a lot of the other aspects of the campaign have spiraled outwards from, okay, who is this villain? Why would she come in conflict with the party? And what interesting scenarios can she create? Because her motivation is that she is from sort of a past age of the world. She's from an age of the world where technology was much greater than it was before, a sort of fallen empire. Shut up, Dael. The past age of the world. And
I just had to moderate one of Dael's comments in our Discord, in our Twitch. Sorry,
our poor podcasting audience will be so lost on this one.
Yeah,
watch the Eldritch Lorecast live, everyone. Tune into our Twitch channel. Anyway, yeah. So this character is from a past age of the world, which means that now my campaign world has ruins of this past empire in it. Cool. I can dot those as dungeons around all over the place. What would put her in conflict with the characters? Well, the characters are part of this hidden order. So how about she has a vendetta against the leader of that order? And that's what puts them in conflict. Okay, if they've got a vendetta, then they must have been friends at one point. So what are events that these two NPCs participated in the history of the world, and then what mark did that leave on the world that the characters can encounter later? And so just by starting from that one villain, it kind of ends up spiraling outwards into all aspects, into dungeons, into NPCs, into locations, into encounters, all of that stuff. And I think villains are the most fun part anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I enjoy the dark fantasy grayness of creating like not villains, not heroes or NPCs, but flawed individuals, and then tweaking the dials a little bit in both directions where I'm like, okay, now I've created this villain. They have this motivation, which is causing them to do villainous stuff. And maybe this happened in their past. That's a little too evil. It's going to be a little too easy for the party to justify going after them. Let's just turn the dial back a little bit, in both directions to give the party that, no good option, grayness of a dark fantasy setting. And also, monsters. I love monsters. I love mythology and being inspired by mythology to create monsters. So creating stat blocks. I was running a stat block just the other night. When I find like, there's so many monster manuals. There's the Monster Grimoire from Grim Hollow. There's the Kobold Press monster manual books. There's the Wizards of the Coast monster manual books. There's the adventures that have, monsters in the back of them. I have so many, and so often I find I'm like, nah, nothing's quite what I want.
I'm just gonna make it myself.
Yeah, exactly. I'll take a little bit of this, and I'll take a little bit of that, and I'll take a little bit of this, and I'll use the home brewery to put it into a stat block for myself, and voila.
Can't help it. I am curious, okay, because we've got such a panel of like experienced, venerated game designers here. I distinctly feel a difference between the stuff I like making for a game to play versus stuff that I'm making as, say a product or something to release on my YouTube channel or whatever. Do you all feel that difference? Or are you like normal?
I wouldn't go that far. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think when you're making something that you know you're going to be using for a specific group of people, you can tailor it to challenge them, delight them, do something specifically for them or for the situation that you're putting the monster in. Now, I've seen people send monsters in when I was working for or helping out with the Kobold Press books. People would send in what they supported the Kickstarter. They get to turn in a monster and we put it in the book. So I was going through these, and some of them were absolutely marvelous as is, and some of them were like obviously for very, very specific situations that would make this monster useful almost never. So then we would have to go through and say, well, if the party is all standing waist deep in water, this power works. Well, how often is that going to happen? So let's tweak this in a way. So, that sort of thing, when you start publishing the monsters that you're creating, you do have to think of a more general audience and more general situations.
Yeah, I think that's a real trick because I love those monsters that are if you're standing waist deep in water, but those are the ones that I would make for my own campaign. That's the sort of monster that kills you out of nowhere in like a Dark Souls dungeon because it's been so highly encounter designed. It's been so game designed into that niche. Now that monster fight is kind of a puzzle, and those are the kind of encounters that really make me excited. Um, but that's not really, just like you're saying, Shawn, that's not really the sort of monster you can put in a monster manual because our monster manuals don't so heavily prescribe encounter design along with them. I can see a world in which there is a monster manual that has like encounter design like that, where it's like, yeah, this is the kind of encounter you want to run with that. But the way we write monster manuals for this edition of D&D, and indeed most editions of D&D, maybe 4th edition was a little different, it just doesn't work that way.
I don't think of my channel as being a D&D channel, right? It has trended in that direction since that's where so much of my focus has been over the last few years. But for a long time, I didn't talk about D&D, and it started as just me sharing stuff I'd been working on because I can't help but homebrew stuff. So, people would be like, how do you run travel on Reddit? And I was like, oh, well, I wrote a whole system. I may as well make a video about it this week, right? So much of my D&D videos are just me sharing stuff I've made for use in my game. And sometimes that's great and it's got really general sort of broad appeal. And sometimes I'll be like, well, here's my approach to this thing. And people say that's way too complicated. That doesn't work because, this, and this will go wrong with players. And I'm like, okay, well, I know that it works because I'm running it. And maybe you just run the game differently to me, or, that's how my head works. There are these differences that come up where it's like, okay, that video was not a hit because I'm literally just sharing what I use at my table rather than thinking about it as a product to share for other people to use.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've got an idea for I didn't prep it quite properly, and so it didn't quite work the way that I wanted it to, but I ran it recently, and it was a dungeon that was inspired by an Oblivion quest where you find a dude asleep, and you go into his dream, and you have to help him, like, recover his sanity, his reasoning, and his, like, one other thing. And so it sends you on a combat quest, a puzzle.
His one other thing.
Yeah, the probably the most important of them all. Who knows? And so I wanted to create this dungeon that was hyper-focused on one of my party members and was like, almost a real collaboration between the GM and the player in terms of like you're in a room that reminds you of your childhood. Please, player who is having this dream, what does that room look like? And then I have to populate it with monsters if there's going to be danger in there. But ask, like, what were you scared of as a kid? What was your character scared of as a kid more accurately? And if they say cats, it's like, all right, here's a whole bunch of manticores that you now have to deal with, or, whatever it happens to be. But I think that would be a real struggle to put as a product in that generalized way because, I've written dream sequences and stuff in other campaigns that weren't quite as involved, but they were very specific to that party at that time that when I go to run it a second time for a completely different party, I can see in my notes, this person will dream about this person will dream about this. And I'm like, uh-oh, this isn't useful at all, anymore. Speaking of things that need to be broadened out.
Speaking of one other important thing.
Very quick email that came in from, yes, this is Leon. Leon's question, again, emailed through to Postfire, podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. That is the email address.
The Postfire Godcast.
Wanted to ask, because there was the discussion about language last week, which I wasn't privy to, so I hope we're not repeating ourselves here, but just wanted to ask, kind of bouncing off of that, how you handle common as a language in your games. They're expressing that they don't really love it. I gauge that common is kind of a catch-all term for like, it's basically like the Goodberry of languages, a way to just like make language not a problem in the game and a bonus if you happen to speak a language that another monster speaks or whatever. Does anybody here not use common and kind of, go the Grim Hollow method of really breaking it up into higher Burak and lower Burak and Astoyan and Soman and, all that?
I've pulled up my notes.
I've often longed to do it, but I've never found a game that would deeply and truly benefit from it.
That's it. That's the problem, right? I have this written and prepared, but I mean, when am I going to find the group that do sit down and say, you know what we would like is to play a campaign where everything's just a little bit harder for no real good reason. I've got it there. It's something I've thought about a lot, but I doubt I will ever play it. But no, I absolutely. So I have notes that say that common exists, but it is just another word for dwarvish, because in my setting, of course, the dwarves were the crafters and the merchants. So that's where a common tongue would spring from. But there's also deep dwarven. It's a little bit archaic and tends to only be used for sort of, talking to your great-grandparents who are still alive because you're dwarves. And then I start breaking things up by region, rather than because it doesn't make sense to tie language to ancestry. That doesn't make sense. It's never made sense. It will never make sense. So then I just have a bunch of different like types of languages that are like, okay, well, yeah, this is from this elven nation, but then they're near these humans, so it combines like this, whereas these people are from this area, and so that elvish combines like this. I just have a bunch of those. And then a bunch of different slang languages. And then Draconic is like kind of the equivalent of Latin. Stuff like that.
I think you've said everything that needs to be said, right? Why make the game harder? The hardest I've ever laughed at a game, there is a region of Greyhawk called Keoland. And the backwater areas of that land, they don't speak common. They only speak Keo-ish. And so the adventurers were going through there and they were trying to find where the castle is. And here are these peasants who cannot speak common, only Keo-ish. So, and they're also very superstitious and they distrust magic. So what does the character do? Cast comprehend languages on their hand. And what do you have to do in order to talk to someone in 3rd edition? You have to touch them. So here is the magic user chasing the peasant around the fields with his glowing hand trying to. So for things like that, language can be great. But for the overall utility, unless you're a linguistics expert and want to really delve into that, the theory of linguistics and the practice of linguistics, for people that just want to smash orcs and steal their pies, it really doesn't add much to a game.
Unless you are Professor Tolkien, then perhaps,
Yeah, that's the bar that we're looking at. Davram in chat makes a good point, says, as much realism as it seems like it would add, it also just complicates things for no benefit. Realism over fun isn't a good trade-off. And I think that's true. Trying to remember verisimilitude is more important than realism.
Sure.
As much as I enjoy thinking about running a game like this, I probably never will.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of realism and fun, sacrificing realism for fun is a good trade-off because this podcast is an illusion. We're not really talking to you right now. This is a recording.
Visions have offended.
Yeah, exactly. Even on Twitch, this is a slightly delayed recording. But it is time to go back to reality with the end of this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed listening to us pontificate. I hope you enjoy the realism of what you're going back to. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this podcast, if you're listening on YouTube, please do subscribe to the channel, give the episode a like. It helps get us out to more listeners. You can give us a rating in iTunes or Spotify or wherever you happen to be listening, or a review would be absolutely fantastic. And of course, leave a comment if you're listening on YouTube, or email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. We are also on Twitch at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 a.m. Australian Time, and that is on Monday if you're in the States, or Tuesday morning if you're in Australia. I think that's the most smooth I've ever done all of that before. So I'm going to go out on a high. I've been Ben Byrne here with James Hake, Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, and we will see you all next week. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-da.
Bum, 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 bum.
Ba-ba-da-da-da-ba-da. Eldritch.
Eldritch Lorecast.
That brought me great joy.